At Issue goes on the road to Madison. I'll broadcast from our headquarters studios and have the chance in our 4 o'clock hour to talk to historian Jeremy Suri, and we'll talk about the wars in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq. In our 5 o'clock hour, I'll be able to talk with, and so will you, that's really more important, the acting director of Wisconsin Public Radio, Mike Crane. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the health of Director Phil Corvo. And then we'll talk about the health of Wisconsin Public Radio. We'll talk about an upcoming one-day pledge drive, something we've never done before. And we'll also take your calls and questions about how we do what we do. When I say you're the public in Wisconsin Public Radio, and I've been saying this for almost 20 years now, I mean it. And one of the ways we prove it is we bring you management on the air, uncensored, unfiltered. Your calls come in and you can ask anything you want to ask. Within reason, as long as you're polite, I guess, you can talk to Mike Crane, the man in charge of Wisconsin Public Radio. We're not like corporations out in the world where you don't necessarily have an opportunity to have action or interaction with the CEO. You do tomorrow. Mike Crane gladly sitting in with me in Madison, and we'll gladly take your calls. With that being said, we go back to the phones, 800-486-8655, lines open. Gerald Celente, our guest. Gerald, we go back to the phones to Madison. Hi, Mary.
Hello. Last year the gentleman was on, and there had been, I called about growth in population. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, with the growth in the number of babies, no one talks about what percentage of the families are on rent subsidies, food stamps, health care subsidy, running out of subsidies, I guess, for the nation and particularly for Wisconsin. I wish there were a program on that.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for you, Mary, and ask you, Gerald Celente, and the trends you're looking at. Do you look at population trends? And if you do,
absolutely.
What are you thinking?
And one of the things we're looking at, for example, is, there's been a population explosion. When you look at, I believe it took 100,000 years to bring the population, the world population, I believe it was 1.5 billion at the turn of the 20th, from the 19th to the 20th century. And in that time, we've added, about 5 billion people in 100 years, and it took 100,000 to add 1.5 billion. And as far as food stamps and welfare,
before you go on with that, because I hear that a lot. What happened in the period of time where we saw the explosive population growth? There was also an explosion in development of the world, wasn't there, in terms of the ability to take on more people because we had the ability to make more food, house more people, give health care to more people, educate more people. So there has been exponential growth. But everyone always throws that out there as if, shock and awe, as opposed to look at how the world grew up at the time the population exploded.
Well, you make good points. When you look at how we're feeding the people, we also now feed them with, again, you see the Obama family, as with the Bush family before him, eating all organic, buying local. At the same time, it's let them eat frankenfoods. When you look at how foods are produced now to meet this mass demand, you're looking at very low quality, intensively raised, hormone-fed, genetically modified, and of course, I'm not going to get into arguments with people whether or not that's as good as growing it naturally.
Yeah, but that's only in last quarter century. But the growth of the population prior to that was eating healthier. But I'm just talking about the way the world grew.
Right, so now we are facing, severe population problems in a lot of ways. But to answer the part of the other question about food stamps and welfare and et cetera, this is what's happening to the whole system from top to bottom. There are people on there for the free ride. You could find any way you can get on it. I know some people that I'm shocked at, that are looking to get disability when they're perfectly able to work a productive job. So now the whole system is becoming, how can I game the system whether it's Wall Street or elements of Main Street to the urban centers. And it's something that's happening, as we're saying, this is much bigger than the decline of the economic standards. We're looking at something that we had coined back in 2002, and we said Empire America is fading fast.
I've got another question here. I'm just shaking my head. Sometimes having you on the air, I have to really work the neck muscles to keep my head from falling down to the floor. Is there, in the trends you're talking about in the Spring Journal, a positive trend that we want to make sure we touch on before we have to wrap up?
The positive trend is that something is dying that deserves to die. As one of the callers earlier said about, what do we need hedge funds, derivatives? These are games. And that's the other thing. When you invest in risk, that's what it's about. It's about risk. When people ask me, why is this worse than the last depression? Well, back then, most people didn't own homes. They weren't $14 trillion in debt. They were buying things they could only afford. The government had trade and surpluses we had as a country and balanced budgets. So we're going into a decline in much worse way. Yes, if we go back to the things that we were, then we can progress. We're believing in a renaissance. And just like following the Dark Age, a renaissance was born. But we also have to understand in our belief system that art is a way of finding the true meaning of the human spirit and not the bottom line. So when you put art into the quality of life, into the quality of food, into the quality of what you look at, tell me, Ben, will you be sorry not to see another mall built along some strip? Or will you be happier to see a beautiful old downtown that was built when quality counted have a revival? And so those are the things that we're looking at. We think that there can be an American Renaissance if we go back to what made us the great nation that we were.
And how far down do we have to fall before you think
the crash has to come first, and people are still denying it because they're looking for those green shoots that they keep telling about that are popping up. So people are still living in denial and hope.
What kind of crash? How bad is it going to look in your eyes?
We're looking already, when you look at total unemployment, and this is coming out of the University of Maryland, total unemployment, when you add in people that are no longer looking for work, discouraged workers, no longer collecting unemployment or working part-time jobs and want full-time, it's already at 17%. We're looking at unemployment at over 25%.
Which puts it past the Great Depression.
Yes.
And a lot of people say there's no way that could happen, but you're saying...
We're saying it's on the way. When you look at these unemployment numbers rolling in, start looking for the retail sector to unravel, and only a false recovery for Wall Street. That's what we're looking at.
Frightening stuff, but I'm glad to have you on because I think, again, people need to hear this point of view. They need to assess for themselves if they believe it or not, and we'll have you back, and we'll talk to you another day.
Well, the motto of the Trends Research Institute is, think for yourself.
Gerald, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gerald Celente is the founder of the Trends Research Institute, editor and publisher of the Trends Journal. You go to trendsjournal.com and read more of his writings. You can read the journal. You can read about his history and what he's said and what he's talking about for the future. And you can stay tuned to this program, and you'll hear him in the future as well. I want to thank producer Mimi Notstein, who put this hour together. Katie Mattson, our on-air producer, and we appreciate the work that she has done. Tomorrow afternoon from Madison, we will talk about the war in Pakistan and Afghanistan and where we're heading over there with all of our fighting. In our 5 o'clock hour, Acting Director of Wisconsin Public Radio, Mike Crane, joins me. We'll talk all things Wisconsin Public Radio. Be well. Thanks for tuning to At Issue on